Hello and welcome to another episode of Wide Open with Ashlyn Harris. Today we are joined by the relationship coach, teacher, writer, and fellow podcaster, Jillian Turecki. Jillian, welcome to the show. So nice to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Well, if you don't know, Jillian has her own show, Jillian on Love. She also just launched, just your new book actually just came out maybe not too long ago, right? A week ago?
2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, and it hit the New York Times bestseller list.
Congrats. That is
Thank you.
Absolutely incredible. The title of the book is It Begins With You, the 9 Hard Truths About Love That Will Change Your Life. So
Yes.
Just to start off, please, tell me about this book. Tell me about the 9 hard truths that some of our listeners who haven't read, maybe just a quick little summary of what you're doing, why you chose to do it, and then we can kind of dive in from there.
Okay, great. So 26 years ago, I discovered yoga and became an avid practitioner and have been ever since. And I wanted to teach it, so I started teaching it. I realized that, I wasn't just helping people do these things with their body. I was helping people heal their relationship with themselves and to change their relationship with themselves, because the practice of yoga is really the study of the mind. And so my curiosity and really what became an obsession of the mind and relationships started many years ago. And so I didn't really know where this was going to take me. And I also wanted to, the traditional route, I wanted to get married and have kids and do that whole thing. And so I met the man who would become my husband and then later on my ex-husband. And I always say that our relationship was about 90% on point and great before we got married and 10% problematic. And you could think, or you could say, well, 10%, that's not that large. Mm-hmm. But the 10% was so profound and so problematic. And so when we got married, the 10% became the 90%.
Wow.
And it flipped, and the 90% became the 10%. And it was a very difficult 2 years of marriage. And the story that led me to the book and led me to why I'm sitting here today is because on June 2nd in 2014, I woke up to a miscarriage, and he texted me from work saying that he wasn't coming home. Mm-hmm. So he broke up with me over text. At the same time, I just learned that my mom had about 2 months to live because she had terminal cancer. So I entered a very depressive, dark night of the soul, and I became obsessed with 2 questions. One was, how the hell am I going to get myself out of this hole that I'm in? And then 2, what does it take to make a relationship thrive? I became obsessed because I was obsessed and by the fact that I was in this position. I felt like my world was ending, and it was. And so I went on this journey and got certified as a coach and started working with thousands of people just because I had to create some meaning out of the catastrophe that was my life at the time. And so I worked with many people, couples, singles. I worked like a crazy person. And then someone said, you should write a book. And I was like, you know what, maybe I should. And here we are.
Wow. That is beautiful. And I thank you for your vulnerability in saying that, because I'm sure that's not easy to share your life struggles with the world, but you're healing people as you discover yourself, which I think is admirable. And I'm grateful for, as someone who recently just went through a divorce. Your teachings and your dedication to your craft touches me very deeply. And I am so happy to be able to dive into some of these, discussing relationships, their challenges, and how we actually work on ourselves to better who we are, but how we show up in terms of our relationships and our partners. I'm a very firm advocate for sharing your scars so other people don't have to experience the same pain.
Yes.
And with that, I always ask a very important question at the top of the show, which I know you just shared so beautifully, but maybe I'll be wrong and that's not the moment that broke you wide open. But the reason why this show is called Wide Open is really expressing the vulnerability of the moments that made us who we are today. Clearly, your pain and struggle throughout what you have experienced has made your lessons and your teachings real, and that's what makes you so great. But I am curious, and I ask this often, what moment in your life really split you wide open, that changed everything?
I would say that I would probably say the death of my mom. Yeah, I think that changed everything in my life, and obviously weighted by the fact that I was also going through the separation and divorce, and sort of mourning the fact that I would never have a family, and then also making the decision to not have a family because I could have really gotten more. I could have just said, when you want something, you kind of go for it. But yeah, I would say the death of my mom changed everything. I grew up with a very mentally ill father. I mean, he was very accomplished in his field, in the field of psychiatry. But he had severe bipolar. He actually was, diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. And he was very, it was very hard growing up with him because I was also very sensitive. And so I grew up very attached to my mom. And so losing her at too young of an age felt like I had no choice but to really learn how to take care of myself in multiple ways. And that's a good thing in many ways, but that's the thing that changed my life forever.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And I would love for you to expand on that a little bit, because I have a feeling your life story and your journey has built you for this moment of teaching.
Yes.
And profound teaching. So I'm curious, what was it like growing up as a child of two immigrants who put all of this focus on the American dream? You've got to do this, you got to do that. And
Yes.
And here you are, your life changed very quickly, and not by your own merit, unfortunately, by someone else's. I'm curious of how you were as a child, how these life experiences built you for this moment in time.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think, one of my strengths since I was a child was beating to my own drum. So the American dream, when you're raised by immigrants, and especially of a specific generation, my parents were, it's about security. That's the goal, is security. It's not high achievement. It's be safe, which I understand. And so being safe is you have your 401k, you have your job with benefits. And mind you, this new world that we live in, where people like myself can become experts and spread our knowledge through social media. This did not exist when we were kids. Right. So there wasn't even maybe you can do this on YouTube, like that. That just didn't exist. And so so when you asked about my childhood, I mean, there's two different things. One is I was just a very sensitive kid with a very sensitive nervous system. And I grew up in a household where my father was manic depressive and my mom, not mentally ill at all, still was an immigrant. She grew up in South Africa in a time where there were no rights, and she didn't have any self-worth, and she didn't have it. She was a housewife. She was a model turned housewife. And so I grew up, so she was depressed because she was with my father and she felt powerless. And I was the kid who felt everything.
Yeah.
And so, but I also had a lot of my own desires and dreams. And so the expectation was graduate, go to college, graduate, work corporate. And it was like dying a slow death for me. I could not stand it. I hate authority. I don't like waking up early in the morning and having to go to like a corporate office. And I always felt completely sad about, not always sad, but sad when it came to work.
Yes.
And then I just, I felt really lost. And I said, I'm going to be a yoga teacher. So my mom accepted it. She accepted it. But I went through a lot of turmoil and inner conflict about what I'm supposed to be and do in this life.
Yeah.
For many, many, many years. It plagued me throughout my 20s.
Oh, and I resonate and I relate a lot because it brings me back to my, the things in my life that were crippling, the things that I experienced and watched within my own walls, and how it's really affected how I move as an adult. The learning and the process of unlearning is, I guess, a lifelong journey we're probably all going through. So with that, I'm curious, so how do you feel your upbringing really shaped your work now that you're really diving into this you first, this relationship coach? I'm curious, by all of this, you're talking about your journey as a child and what you experienced in your home. Really, how did that upbringing shape your work now?
Okay, in many different ways. Well, one is my father really always had a strong work ethic, and I have a strong work ethic. I was expected to always try my best. It's not like I never was expected to be perfect, but I was expected to try my best and always put in my best in everything. I would not be sitting here today had I had the father that I always wanted to have.
Wow.
There's no way. I wouldn't be sitting here today if my mom had perfect self-worth and, my father was a great man or a great father. I wouldn't be here today. I had to go through many difficult relationships, and I went through some beautiful relationships. I don't want to misrepresent myself. I was not someone who was just always in bad relationships. I wasn't, but I definitely had a handful. And so, and I had to learn how to love myself when it came to being in a romantic relationship. And I think it's important to note that getting everything you want doesn't guarantee a good life.
Oh, that's power. That's powerful.
It just doesn't.
Wow.
Because first of all, our life is how we see it. It's not really what's happening. So you could still get everything you want, but you're not necessarily getting what you need in life. And so your perspective is skewed. And so I really like to emphasize to people that, if you had a difficult relationship with a parent or you had a difficult childhood, that's really hard. And there's a lot of hard things that come from that. But can you see that there's good things that came from that too?
And that's the reframing your mindset part for me.
Yes, 100%.
I think too often, and I love that you said that, I think too often we make excuses for ourselves. Life is hard in general, and to unpack years and years of trauma and childhood experiences, it's hard and it's a commitment.
Yes.
And I don't think people dive enough into it. They bring their baggage into every relationship, And then when they don't unpack it there, they unpack it on their children. And it's really this vicious cycle. And that is one of the things that my upbringing taught me. In sports, I'll be very honest, I have learned so much more from my failures than I ever did from my successful moments of winning championships. And I've won at every level.
Yes.
But the failures are what always stick with me the most. And it helps me become a better person because I realize that family dynamic didn't work. Now let's really figure out why. That relationship didn't work. Let's not make excuses for it. Let's really dive in. Yes. And what I love that you're so openly talking about, and what I love so much about your book is one of the truths is you must make peace with your parents. Yeah. When that was one of, I have so many questions because I'll be very honest. I grew up in a really tough home, and soccer was my outlet. It was my survival. I ticked very differently than most people because it was literally life or death for me. I was not going back to what I experienced as a child. I had to make a better life for myself and my children and my family one day. But reading through a lot of your work, as soon as I hit this, you must make peace with your parents, I almost fell out of my skin, truthfully, because I'm going to say something that was very profound for me, and I really want you to dive into it. As soon as I became a mother to my 2 children, I forgave my mom. I have the best relationship with my mom now than I ever have. And everything was put in perspective for me when I became a mom and I forgave her and realized she did the best she could with what she had. Because I have been tested at every level. I am an exceptional athlete who has done things that it's honestly unthinkable. And I have access to so much more than my parents ever did. And that's money, resources, a village, you name it. And it is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is raising a child. And I'm talking the mental load, the emotional load, the physical load. I am constantly scared to death I'm failing them. It is a real thing. And it affects everything in my life, the way I move, the way I show up for myself and the people around me. So what I'm trying to say is this is such an important piece not enough people talk about. And I'm curious in the book what you mean about this, the 9th truth.
Yes. Well, I love that. First of all, I love that you shared that. The first thing I thought of was empathy. Maybe that's, empathy is the ability to stand in someone else's shoes and experience life through. And when you became a mom, maybe that was the moment that you were able to experience some sort of empathy. And when we can feel empathy for someone, that's when a relationship has the power to change. So I knew when I wrote that it was going to be that's why it was the last truth. I was like, if I start with this, no one will read the book. But people would be like, fuck this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I say in the chapter, if you've been molested, terribly abused, this isn't about making peace with your parents at all. And also the chapter is about, you could have a great relationship with your parents. It's about examining the story that you have about this parent, one or both of your parents, about your childhood, and acknowledging how that story is controlling your life and your love life in a way that is holding you back, that is tethering you. And so the making peace with your parent is really re-examining the story and learning how to let go of some stuff. And so I've had a challenging relationship with my father since birth. And he actually passed away when I was writing that chapter.
Oh, Wow.
Yeah. And so my journey really has been about making peace with the fact that he is my father and letting go of the fear and the hate that I experienced for most of my life when I even thought of him.
Mm.
And I had to really examine and explore how much that had a chokehold on me and how much it was ruining my life in some way.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so I had to start to look at him through a different lens. I had to start to look at the story through a different lens. And part of that is empathy, as you
Yes.
described. Part of that is compassion. And part of that is recognizing that you're not a helpless child anymore. And so you can start to look at this person through the filter of your wiser, more adult self. And so you see the person's humanity. Now, I'm not going to suggest that to someone who was severely abused or molested.
Mm-hmm.
However, you can still with very, very targeted therapy, make peace with that. Maybe, I've worked with someone who now counsels survivors of severe childhood abuse. And so she's found a way to use what happened to her to give back. But in general, most people are walking around, I was estranged from my father for many years.
Mm.
And estrangement does not solve things. And sometimes you have to be estranged because it is literally a matter of life or death. But most people are estranged because they're holding on to a story and they're avoiding what really needs to be looked at. And if that's the case, the estrangement is not going to heal you.
Wow.
It's going to make things worse.
That's a really great point. And I just am thinking, and, as you're speaking, I'm reflecting, and so much of the work that I'm doing with this podcast is actually healing me.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to interview people like yourself and really dive into so much good work while I am going to therapy. I just find that this work I'm doing and this openness I'm now sharing, I think is really healing me in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, when you made this huge pivot in your life, you were a yoga teacher, all of these things were happening in real time that were, changing what you thought life looked like. Did you become a relationship coach to help heal yourself in this way as well? Because it was so close to you and you were directly impacted by so much of what was happening so quickly all at once?
Yes, I believe so. I believe I do believe that the things that we teachers decide to teach are lessons that we need to learn or have been processing ourselves. I think, there's two parts to it. One is helping others helps me just heal my story.
Oh, yes.
Right. And it makes me feel like my life, that everything that happened to me has a deeper purpose. And then it gives some context to why we exist. So I think that for me, and I think for people who do this, we sort of derive our understanding of what the meaning of life is through helping others heal from things that you needed to heal from yourself.
Yes. Well, then I'm curious with that because, the title of the book is It Begins With You, and it's one of the core truths. How did that moment of darkness really connect you with your truth?
Yeah. Well, I realized that every relationship I've ever been in has one common denominator, and that's me. And that doesn't mean, it's not the platitude of like, oh, I guess the problem is me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you're the problem. It means that you are part of a dynamic. We are all, we do not exist in a vacuum, and that we need to be the change that we wish to see in our lives and our love lives. I think when I realized that it's so important to have help, but your therapist can't get you to the other side of hell. Your parents can't get you to the other, like no one can do it. Like ultimately the onus is on you. And I think that that's a lovely thing because there's so little that we have control over in this life. I mean, most things are completely out of our control, but we do have some control. And that's what I wanted to point out with that core truth. It begins with you.
And that really leads us to no one will come to save you.
Yeah. No one is coming to save you.
No one is coming to save us. And you know, that's such a beautiful thing to say. But how do you even dive into that of owning that responsibility?
You know, I think it's about understanding that we are responsible for our own happiness. And that
part.
Yeah.
That part.
We are. And the point is surround yourself with people, places, and things that add to your happiness, that make it easier for you to access your joy or your contentment or your fulfillment. And so I think a lot of people believe that once they find that right person and they have that right relationship, that all their problems are going to go away. And the thing is, no, for me, the aim of a relationship, the point of a relationship is to have an ally as you go through life. But they can't actually do the work for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's such an important thing that makes me think about how so much of what I did as a player has now carried into my personal life. And it's a really hard thing for me to separate as I move through the world. As an athlete, I was very good at a very young age. And I played in a team sport. And everyone knows for you to be successful, you put your team before yourself.
Yes.
You're in service to other people because the sum is only as good as all the moving parts, right?
Yes.
And for us to be extraordinary, my ego was left at the door. My selfishness was left at the door. When it came to being a successful team, it didn't matter what my wants and needs were. However, I carried that into my life and my personal life. And that has affected a lot of probably my failed marriage, my failed relationships, because it was too hard for me to say, but wait, what about what I need? What about what I want? And it was an uncomfortable place to be in to ask for those. Yeah. But the only person that was hurting in the process was me. In turn, it was creating an extreme amount of resentment in the relationship.
I was waiting for that one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel seen or heard. And that is my fault. That is no one else's fault but mine. So I'm having to unlearn this part of me that I don't always have to give until I have nothing left. There has to be this balance of what do you want and need? How do you communicate that? And it's so much, it's a lot in your work.
Yes.
And it makes me reflect a lot, even as we're sitting here now. I'm curious do you hear that a lot when you're doing your teaching and your coaching for relationships? Is that very common?
It's very common for people to not speak up and ask for what they need because they don't think they're worthy of getting their needs met. You know, you described your conditioning of being an athlete and being part of a team. For others, it's, good girls don't speak up or nice guys don't speak up, whatever it is. There's all this conditioning for sure. I see a lot more selfishness, if I'm being honest, people getting so obsessed with their needs that they forget that they're in a relationship with someone who has needs too. So I see that more often. And you know, it's an interesting thing that you describe, because you're giving nature and the fact that you are that quote unquote team player. That's a good thing. That in and of itself is not a problem. It's about balancing that and understanding that the team gets stronger when you are able to be an advocate for yourself inside of the team.
That's power. I love that. Wow. Yeah. And I'm learning that right now in real time, and really like unpacking a lot of my life and my lessons and the things I've been taught and conditioned to be. So we're constantly evolving, right?
Yes.
We're always learning about ourselves. And that brings me to my next question, because it's really important for me. During a time of such darkness, during the process of my divorce, I ended up finding someone came into my life that really changed a lot for me in the best ways. And I talk about this with my therapist often is, am I in a place to give and receive what is necessary for a very good dynamic in terms of a relationship when I'm in the hardest season of my life? So, you know, it's interesting because a lot of what you're talking about is it begins with you. But I found the most incredible, profound love in the process of unlearning the biggest like hardship of my life. But if I wasn't open to receive, I would have shut that door.
I know. And that would have been tragic.
It would have been, you know, life is based on timing. If I would have shut that door, that would have been it.
Yeah. And love comes in very unexpected ways, and you don't have to perfectly process everything to be ready for a relationship. In fact, it's better. I mean, you know, what I find tragic is people going years and years and years not opening themselves up to love again because of their divorce. And it's like, okay, well, you just gave all your power to that relationship and to that and your ex-spouse. They just basically control your life. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I'm glad that you're open to it.
Yeah. And it's the best decision I ever made. I do think people are constantly in this grief bubble, and they're not willing to open that side of their heart up to say, even in the hardest season of my life, I'm worthy enough to receive that type of love.
Yes.
And I think that's the hardest part, is feeling worthy enough to receive it. So I've been trying this new technique of even when even when my partner says, I'm so proud of you. Like, it's such a foreign thing to hear from me. I don't receive it well because that's my own issues of self-worth.
Yeah.
So this new thing I'm saying is I receive that thank you because it's hard. It's hard to be open to receive love. But also I'm curious because your teachings talk about it begins with you.
Yes.
So how do we become better receivers and sit with that and say, okay, I am enough. I am worthy of this kind of love. I am worthy of this type of connection, not only with myself, which is first and foremost, but this connection with this other person. I am worthy of that kind of love and relationship and care.
That's a good question. Well, first, it's important to note that relationships do not thrive unless there's vulnerability. And we need to be able to receive. We need to be being receptive to love is what creates emotional intimacy. If there's a wall up and the not receiving is just a wall, and you can't make a relationship work with walls. I think at first it's about noticing it all boils down to self-awareness. So if you have the awareness, it's really hard for me to receive a compliment, and then a compliment comes your way. It's noticing, where do I feel this in my body? Where do I feel the resistance? Do I feel it in my chest? Do I feel it in my belly? Do I feel it in my neck? Where do I feel the tension where I'm sort of recoiling from this compliment from this person, right? And then you take some deep breaths and you let it go and you soften, because you have to unbrace yourself, right? You have to soften your physiology to be able to receive it. And that's how you do it. You can't really talk yourself into it. You need to practice it, and you need to bring your body into it.
Which is where your yoga teachings probably come into great use, I'm sure.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And it's important. It's hard. And it's a very good thing for you to recognize. And I would imagine, maybe I'm wrong, but to achieve at the level that you have as an athlete, it's almost like nothing is ever good enough. Like you have to keep pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself. And so nothing is ever like, you're just like, you're never getting the excellence. So for someone to say, I'm proud of you, it's like, what do you mean? No. If I give into that, then where does my drive go?
It's like a participation award. Like, what did I get to deserve that? And it's because I experience in my life, you win a championship. There's one, second place is failure.
Yes, so exactly. So there you go.
You're always, and then they teach you as an athlete to have this really great sense of short-term memory, because when you fail, even in the moment on the field, you got to bounce back very quickly.
Yes. Which
really fucks with your emotional needs in the real world, because you just become robotic to everything. It's that felt like shit. I'm going to move on because I have to have short-term memory. And I'm like, oh God, that's not good. We have to unpack that.
Yes, exactly.
But having that understanding internally is just as important as having it externally when it comes to relationships. So I'm curious, what's the biggest misconception about love? That's heavy, I know, but I'm just
it's a good question. The biggest misconception about love is that it's just a feeling and not also a practice and a verb. That, I would say, is the biggest misconception of love. That love is that thing that we feel with all the butterflies and all that excitement, when really that's lust.
Ooh.
And love is not something that we just feel, it's something that we do. It's because sometimes to be in a relationship with someone isn't entirely convenient. Sometimes we're just not in the mood, or our old stuff comes up and our ego gets in the way. So the pursuit of trying to overcome that and to give love when maybe it's hard to give love, that's love. That's what it's all about. And so love is not just a feeling.
I love that. And it really, love is not just a feeling. And I think the other big misconception, people always think the feeling of the attachment and the lust at the beginning of the honeymoon stage, that they're supposed to experience that through this lifetime commitment with another partner. I'm like, I'm not the same fucking human I was a year ago.
Yeah, no,
right?
Absolutely not. So absolutely not.
How does this evolution of change, as we continue to grow as people, things happen to us where we carry it in our bodies, and then of course we always shit dump it on the most important people in our lives, which most often are our partners.
Yes. The most important thing about growing together as a couple is you must always have a shared vision. Now, that doesn't mean that every goal has to be the same and every vision has to be the same. You're two separate humans and autonomous beings. But couples really need a shared goal. They need a shared vision of the life that they want to lead. And then they can be teammates, allies, unified front in moving towards their shared vision. That's how people grow together.
And I do think, and it's always this, I always kind of think, because I'm a very, very big sports buff, I always think in like passing the baton, like when you're running, right? I think in relationships, everyone always said, like, no one's going to be 50-50 in a relationship. Like, I don't know where that comes, like that.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. There's never a time we show up as equals in a relationship, in a marriage, in a friendship. Someone's always in front of the other, and then something will happen and it'll shift. So I always am thinking in real time is if I'm ahead of someone in this one moment of my life and journey, I don't want my partner to get out of reach. I don't want them I don't want to be in a place where I can't see them, where I can't lend my arm back and pass that baton off, right? So
I like that metaphor. Yeah.
I do, because it's like eventually there's going to be a time where I'm struggling and she's way ahead of me. But if she keeps running and I'm walking, that fucking distance is going to break us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 100%. It's in reaction to how relationships used to be in the 50s and before the 50s, where there was a lot of imbalance. And obviously that in those days, it was more heterosexual relationships, but it was this idea of, the man having all the power and the woman staying home, and these very, very acute gender roles, right? And so as we evolved as a species, it's, okay, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to be 50-50. But that doesn't work, because then it makes love a transaction.
Say that again.
It makes love a transaction. And it's so funny. It's like this idea, because the word partner has become very popular. Like, people don't say boyfriend or girlfriend or spouse anymore. They say partner. And I say it too, just because it's part of the zeitgeist. But sometimes I have issue with that word, because it sounds so businessy. It sounds so 50-50. It sounds so transactional. But really, truly, what we want to be doing is putting 100% into the relationship. But the reality is that, yes, sometimes you're going to be at 10% and you're going to need that support. And it's not about meeting each other in the middle. It's about going the distance, and it's looking at the sum total, right? Obviously, if you're in a relationship and one person is just always at 10%, then there's going to be an imbalance. But the idea is there's an ebb and a flow. Sometimes you'll be at 20%, sometimes they'll be at 80%. But when you look at the totality, if you look at the whole relationship as a whole, it balances out. But this, I'll scratch your back if you scratch my back. And people are doing that all the time, very specifically. Well, one is there's just societal thinking and conditioning of, well, I don't want to be taken advantage of, and so we have to split the chores. It's just a new way of thinking. But then there's the fear of, I'm not going to open my heart. I'm only going to open my heart when I know that you're totally opening your heart. And then when two people have that mentality, guess what? No one's opening up their heart.
Nope. Totally shutting down.
Yeah.
And I say this often in my previous relationships. It's the notion of keeping score.
Yes.
It fucking drives me nuts.
Yes, it drives me nuts too.
Oh my God. And this constant, I think, especially as an athlete and an elite high-level athlete, the keeping score and the competition is so toxic.
It
in
really
relationships.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so the keeping score is all about one-upmanship, right? And so it's about, I'm not going to do this for you unless you are doing this for me. And that mentality destroys a relationship. It really love has to be something that you give freely. Now, you don't want to give love to the point where you don't fill your own tank, but it's still something that needs to be given freely. You're not giving it out of fear. You're not giving it out of manipulation like you're a pleaser. The point is to become a true giver. And the thing is that you have to be an advocate for in your relationship. You have to be an advocate for your needs. And it is also true that love should be given abundantly.
Especially in this new landscape.
Absolutely. And so the idea of keeping score is withholding love. You can decide to leave a relationship because it's so imbalanced. You give and you never receive. But you can't make a relationship work by being a withholder.
And that's where ego steps into the picture, which we've all experienced at some point in a relationship.
We experience it all the time. I mean, our greatest task in a relationship is always to overcome the ego.
And that's in sports, and that's in business, and that's in life, and that's everything.
100%. Everything.
So that connects me to my last question for you. And you know, we are in a unique climate. With social media, with more dating apps than there's a million under the sun at this point.
Yes.
Like, what is your thoughts about social media, the new modern day era? Like, how does that hurt or help us in relationships in this day and age?
So I recently heard a very, very smart and modern rabbi speak on YouTube. And he said, and he was answering a question, have they destroyed relationships or destroyed life? And he offered a perspective that I believe in 100%, and I'll share it. No, the phone is not the problem. Technology is not the problem. Our human beings, our weakness as a human being is that we are easily distracted. And that we are always looking for some sort of escape from our pain.
Wow, that's powerful.
And so the phone or technology is just the thing that makes our weakness easier for us to give into our weakness. So we have to use technology rather than have technology use us. And so recognize that part of our weakness is that we can treat others as if they're disposable. We can use scrolling as a distraction. We can be slaves to dopamine. And so, yes, has it impacted dating? Absolutely. But remember, if we just blame the dating apps, if we just blame technology, it's never been easy to find love. If it were easy, there would be no movies or songs written about it. And so knowing that, can you approach technology and dating and social media in such a way that you have more control over yourself so that you keep it in check, whether that is scrolling or swiping on a dating app and being like, you know what, I'm only doing it for 1 hour a day. That's it. And then I'm putting the phone away. Or I'm not going to just endlessly text this person, this stranger, and develop some false sense of intimacy with the stranger who could be, not to sound so pessimistic, but who could be married. You just never know. I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to get on a phone call, or I'm just going to meet them in person if I find it appropriate, just to figure this out. So it's about self-control.
Oh, wow.
That's how I see it.
It is. It's about self-control.
Yeah.
And it's about you.
Yeah.
And seeing it and understanding it and knowing. It's really, and this is where it dives into sports and yoga, it's really knowing yourself and holding yourself accountable.
Yes.
I think
100%.
that's the biggest thing for me in life is if I don't hold myself accountable and if in my failures, I don't really deep dive into it, am I ever going to make myself better, or am I going to constantly keep saying it's everyone else's fault but my own?
Yes, exactly.
And that's it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on this week.
Oh, thank you for having me.
The work you do and the way you show up in this space and the way you dedicate your life to your craft, we are all better for it and we are all grateful. So thank you so much. And for the listeners and anyone tuning in, if you want to dive further into Jillian's work on love and self-acceptance, make sure you check out her book, It Begins With You. Thank you again for coming on Wide Open. I hope our paths cross again.
I hope so too. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lovely conversation. And I'm sure our paths will cross.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you as always. And
Yes.
good luck with the new book. And all of our viewers and listeners out there, go check it out. It Begins With You.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.